It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. I, along with three of my closest friends, Ryan, Lisa, and Mark, had planned to spend a few days in a remote mountain cabin far from the city noise. We wanted to unplug, enjoy the snow, and share a few laughs. The cabin was old but charming, with a large stone fireplace, creaky wooden floors, and tall windows that looked out into the forest. The weather forecast warned of heavy snowfall, but we didn't think much of it. We had enough supplies, and the idea of being snowed in sounded cozy at the time. By the time we reached the cabin, the snow had already started falling heavily. We unpacked, lit a fire, and settled in for what we thought would be a relaxing weekend. The first night was uneventful. We played board games, told stories, and watched the snow pile up outside. By morning, the cabin was buried up to the windowsills, and the wind howled like a living thing. The storm had intensified faster than we expected, cutting off any chance of leaving. We were truly isolated. The firewood pile inside the cabin was running low, so I volunteered to gather more from the shed about 50 feet from the cabin. I bundled up, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out into the blinding snow. The cold hit me like a slap, the wind cutting through my jacket like a blade. As I trudged toward the shed, something caught my eye. Footprints in the snow. They weren't mine. They were fresh, leading from the edge of the forest toward the cabin. But there was something wrong with them. There was no trail leading to the forest. The prints started in the middle of the snow, as if someone had just appeared out of thin air. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I quickly gathered the firewood, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just some strange trick of the snow, I told myself. I hurried back inside and didn't mention the footprints to the others. By nightfall, the storm grew even worse. The wind shrieked against the windows and the temperature plummeted. We huddled by the fire, listening to the blizzard rage outside. Suddenly, there was a knock at the window. We all froze. The knock came again, deliberate and rhythmic. Ryan grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the window. Nothing. No one was there, just the swirling snow. "It's probably just the wind," Lisa said nervously, trying to convince herself as much as us. But the knock came again, louder this time. Mark stood up, walked to the window, and flung it open. Snow blew in, stinging our faces. But there were no footprints outside the window. Nothing but smooth, undisturbed snow. We shut the window and locked it. The fire crackled, the only sound breaking the silence inside. But the uneasy feeling lingered, like a shadow creeping into the corners of the room. Later that night, after we had all retreated to our rooms, I was jolted awake by a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible whispering. It seemed to come from within the walls. I strained to hear, holding my breath. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. "Come outside," it seemed to say. "Come now." I sat up, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard my name, clear as day. Abdullah. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the living room. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. I peered out the window. There, just beyond the edge of the light, was a figure. A shadowy form standing motionless among the trees. I blinked and it was gone. The next morning, I told the others what I had seen. Ryan laughed it off, blaming the isolation and the storm. Lisa looked worried but said nothing. Mark, however, frowned. "There's something wrong with this place," he muttered. We decided to stay together, refusing to split up for any reason. But the sense of dread only grew. The knocking continued at odd intervals, always at different windows, always with no one there. And the whispering never stopped. That evening, as darkness fell, we heard it again, knocking. This time, it came from the front door. We gathered our courage, armed with a fireplace poker and a kitchen knife, and opened the door. The storm had calmed for a moment. Snow fell softly, blanketing the world in silence. But there, on the porch, were footprints, leading from the door into the woods. Mark stepped forward, shining his flashlight along the trail. The footprints stretched away, vanishing into the darkness. "They're not ours," he whispered. "Close the door," Lisa begged. "Please, close it." We did, bolting it shut, but we knew now that something was out there, something that wasn't human. That night was the worst of my life. The knocking became relentless, echoing from every window, every door. The walls seemed to breathe, the wood creaking and groaning as if alive. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, shapes that disappeared the moment I turned my head. And then Ryan screamed. We rushed to his room, finding him standing by the window, pale and trembling. "I saw it," he whispered. "It was right there, looking at me." "What did you see?" I asked. "Eyes," he said. "Red eyes, and a face." No, not a face. Something else. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. The storm raged outside, but the terror inside the cabin was worse. We kept the fire blazing, our only defense against the darkness. By morning, we were desperate. We had to leave, storm or no storm. We packed quickly, throwing on our coats and boots, and opened the door. The footprints were back. This time they circled the cabin, over and over, a labyrinth of tracks weaving in and out of the woods. We didn't care. We ran. The snow was blinding, the cold biting deep. We followed the narrow trail back toward the road, but something followed us. We could hear it, the crunch of snow behind us, the faint whispering carried on the wind. Lisa tripped, falling face first into the snow. We hauled her up, but when we looked back, we saw it, a figure, tall and thin, its face hidden in the storm, its eyes red, burning like embers. We didn't look back again. We reached the road and kept running until we found a passing truck. The driver took us to the nearest town, where we collapsed in the warmth of a small diner. We never spoke of what happened to anyone else. But sometimes, on quiet winter nights, when the wind howls and the snow falls heavy, I hear it. A knock at the window, a whisper in the dark, and I know it's still out there. It was a brutal winter night in a small, snow-covered town when I found myself house-sitting for a friend. The house was old and creaky, nestled far enough from the main road to feel isolated. With thick snowdrifts surrounding the property and a fierce storm howling outside, I knew I was in for a long, cold evening. My friend had left me a list of basic instructions: keep the fire going, use the landline only for emergencies, and stay indoors. The house had a strange, timeless feel to it. The wooden floors groaned underfoot, and every window seemed to peer out into an endless white void. The first night passed without incident. I enjoyed the quiet, reading a book by the fire as the wind battered the windows. But everything changed the second night. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the old rotary landline rang. I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. Nobody ever called landlines anymore, especially not in the middle of the night. I picked up the receiver, my heart racing. "Hello?" I asked. There was silence for a moment. Then, a calm, raspy voice whispered, "I see you." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Who is this?" I demanded. The line went dead. I hung up, feeling uneasy but dismissing it as a prank. After all, kids could still pull old-fashioned pranks, right? I peered out the window, but there was nothing to see. Just the snow falling heavily, covering everything in a thick white blanket. The next night the phone rang again. I had stayed up late, trying to shake off the nervous feeling from the night before. When the landline rang, I glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. I hesitated before answering. "Oh?" I said cautiously. Heavy breathing came from the other end. Then the same raspy voice spoke again. "I'm getting closer." My stomach twisted. I hung up immediately and checked every door and window. They were all locked. But something outside caught my eye. Footprints, fresh ones. They led up to the porch but didn't seem to have any origin, no trail leading to them. Just a set of prints starting from nowhere and ending right at the front door. The following nights grew worse. Each night at 2:47 a.m. the phone rang, and each time the voice grew more menacing. And Hey, won't you come outside? I'm right here. I could barely sleep, my nerves frayed with fear. One night, after the usual call, I discovered the front door slightly ajar. I was certain I had locked it. I bolted it shut, heart pounding. Later, I heard a soft scratching at the window. When I summoned the courage to look, nothing was there. But I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the snow outside the bedroom window. That room was on the second floor. Desperate, I set traps to catch the intruder. I wedged chairs under door handles, placed bells near entry points, anything to alert me, but nothing worked. The traps were undisturbed, yet I still heard doors creak and footsteps shuffle. The worst moment came when I received the most chilling call yet. I left the window open, the voice whispered. I spun around. A draft of icy wind blew in from the living room. One of the windows, which I had locked, was now wide open. Snow had piled onto the floor. I ran to shut it, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. In the distance, under a streetlight barely visible through the storm, I saw it. A figure, tall, shadowy, unmoving. Its head tilted slightly, as if watching. I blinked and it was gone. Finally, I called the police. They arrived within minutes, 2 officers with concerned expressions. They searched the property thoroughly but found no sign of an intruder. The fresh snow had covered any potential tracks. Stress can do strange things, one officer suggested, especially when you're alone in a place like this. I'm telling you, someone is out there, I insisted. They exchanged doubtful glances but left, leaving me more alone than ever. That night, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. I lit candles and kept a flashlight close as I huddled in the living room. The fire was dying, and I didn't dare move to get more wood. The footsteps started again. Slow, deliberate, echoing down the hall. My breath caught in my throat. Then came the creaking of a door. I gripped a fireplace poker tightly, my hands trembling. A whisper floated through the darkness. I'm inside now. I swung the poker wildly at shadows, my heart hammering in my chest. But I hit nothing. The phone rang one last time. Please, I whispered into the receiver, tears streaming down my face. Leave me alone. There was no reply, just the sound of breathing, and then silence. When morning finally came, I couldn't stay a moment longer. I left the house without looking back. Days later, I learned something that chilled me to my core. The house had a history of strange disappearances. Over the years, several people who stayed there vanished without a trace. I never told anyone what happened to me, but sometimes, late at night, when I hear the wind howling or a phone ringing somewhere in the distance, I remember. And I wonder if the midnight caller ever found someone new to watch. For some, it's a tradition. For others, it becomes a nightmare. In a small, isolated town up north, where winter dominates most of the year, there's a frozen lake notorious for its ice fishing spots. Locals call it Frostmere. Over the years, it has gained a darker reputation. A place where strange things happen, and not everyone makes it back. The most chilling story about Frostmere begins with Tom Reiner, a well-known and experienced fisherman. Tom was the kind of man who could read the ice like a book. He knew its cracks, its creeks, and where the fish gathered. One afternoon he set out alone, bundled against the brutal wind, his sled full of gear as he trudged toward his favorite spot. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Tom had radioed a friend just before sundown. His voice was calm at first, describing the day's catch. But then it changed. He mentioned hearing noises, strange rhythmic knocking coming from below the ice. He joked about it being a fish with a hammer. But after a pause, he added something more chilling. It's not fish. It sounds like whispers. The friend, thinking Tom was just playing around, laughed it off. When Tom didn't return that night, his friend called the authorities. The next morning, they found his fishing hole, a large, gaping circle of black water. His sled was there, his lines still set. Even his gloves were on the ice, frozen stiff. But Tom was gone. No footprints led away from the hole, only to it. Stories like these often lead to whispers and rumors, and Frostmere had plenty. I remember one cold February evening when I decided to try my luck at Frostmere. The sky had darkened and I was the last one out on the ice. The town had been talking about Tom's disappearance, but I figured it was just bad luck, a weak spot in the ice. I wasn't superstitious. I set up my tent, drilled my hole, and waited. At dusk, a strange sound broke the silence, a deep groaning from the ice below. Ice often shifts, so I didn't think much of it. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A hollow, rhythmic knock. I turned off my radio to listen. There it was. Tap, 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 like someone knocking from beneath. I leaned over, peering into the dark water, my breath fogging up the air. A whisper was faint, just beneath the surface, like voices speaking words I couldn't quite catch. My chest tightened. My hands trembled as I grabbed my flashlight, shining it down into the hole. The ice was thick, at least 2 feet, but something dark moved underneath. A shadow, shifting slowly, circling the hole. I blinked, convinced it was my imagination, but then I saw it, a shape, a hand, pale and splayed wide, pressing against the ice from below. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming in my chest. Panic surged through me. I packed my gear as quickly as I could, keeping one eye on the hole. The knocking continued, growing louder, faster, as if something was trying to break through. I sprinted toward the shore, my breath ragged in the freezing air. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I locked the doors and stared out at the lake. The surface was smooth and white, untouched. But as I sat there, the windshield fogging from my breath, I saw something. A figure standing far out on the ice, tall and thin, with arms that seemed impossibly long. It didn't move. I told my story to a few people. Some believed me, most didn't. They chalked it up to fatigue or the cold playing tricks on my mind. But I'm not the only one. There are other stories. A teenager ice skating after dark claimed that hands burst through the ice and grabbed his ankle. He escaped with a deep gash, but swore he felt fingers, cold and bony, pulling him down. An older man fishing near where Tom disappeared reported seeing faces in the ice. Their eyes were wide, mouths open in silent screams. Despite everything, people still fish at Frostmere. The lake draws them in, even those who know the stories. There's something about it, the quiet lure of solitude, the thrill of the catch. But when the sun dips low and the shadows stretch long, even the bravest among us hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you might hear the whispers soft and cold, just beneath your feet, waiting.